I am literally walking in the footsteps of heroes, and in particular, my hero, and hopefully by now your hero, James Scott, Duke of Monmouth. On the 11th of June 1685, after many weeks of persuading and goading, he's finally landed here, Lyme Regis in Dorset, on this very beach, now called Monmouth Beach. Out there, just beyond the Cobb and in the harbour, there were 3 ships, 1 powerful Dutch frigate and 2 fishing smacks. Monmouth had brought with him 87 followers, lots of gunpowder, arms and armour. The Monmouth Rebellion had begun. Well, it certainly wasn't chosen by accident. Lyme Regis was a healthy distance away from any garrisons of regular army units. This would allow Monmouth to land uncontested, and more importantly, would give him time to recruit, train and build an army capable of taking on the regular army of his uncle. Next, Lyme Regis had a direct route to London, Monmouth's planned axis of advance. It had a safe anchorage with the Cobb and was a perfect spot for unloading supplies onto the gently sloping beaches. And even more importantly was the population of the Westcountry. Monmouth had been received warmly on his royal progress of 1680, and with the large concentrations of hearty Protestants, dissenters and nonconformists, especially in Taunton, Monmouth could well expect huge support. But Monmouth was not the first rebel to land. The day before, the 10th, 2 men had been disembarked at Chidiock Bay, just up the coast. This clandestine pair's task was simple: to raise the local population and enable the Duke to get a head start on any militia units nearby. Colonel Venner was to travel to Taunton to raise men, and Nathaniel Wade, the Bristol lawyer, was to race to Ford Abbey, to Edmund Prideaux, to gather as much money and support as he could. But what would the inhabitants of Lyme Regis have seen when they woke up on the morning of the 11th of June? A Dutch frigate, a powerful warship anchored just off the Cobb, would have been the last thing they would have expected to see. What was afoot? Were they at war? Had there been a storm? The frigate didn't seem damaged. The sails weren't torn. Her yards all intact. No battle damage could be seen. Now the small boats were pulling off towards the shore. There were a lot of men. The early morning sunshine glinted off what looks like armour and weapons. The boats finally ground up on the beach, and men spilled out in all directions. Many were wearing lavish and expensive purple coats lined in red. They were all armed to the teeth. Muskets, pistols, swords, armour. Who were these renegades? Foreign mercenaries? And then a man appeared they all knew. A man that he had dreamed about. A man of talent, of honour. A military commander of royal blood. Their salvation from the papist usurper. It was the Protestant Duke. Men cheered. The crowds gathered to watch their idol march up the beach, up into town, where he planted his leveller green colour with the quote, "Fear nothing but God." The crowds cheered until they were hoarse. For Monmouth, it must have seemed like the clock had been turned back, to the days when he was a hero at court, a hero on the battlefield, and a hero to the common people. Men followed as his colour was planted in the town square, and the recruiting began. Ferguson was there, the infamous plotter, haranguing the crowds with tales of terror of the papist king in London, how he had poisoned late King Charles II, and how arbitrary government was on its way. It would not be long before Monmouth had 1,000 men and horse under his command, soon to be allocated to captains and trained in the intricacies of pike and shot warfare. But not everyone in Lyme was a supporter of Monmouth. A natural enemy of the Duke and his cause was the town's mayor, one Gregory Alford. Alford was a Tory through and through, and a great supporter of rightful monarchy, and now the new king, James II. He had been a vehement persecutor of dissenters in and around Lyme, and had been closely linked to the escape of Charles II when he was on the run after the Battle of Worcester. Alford, clearly not a popular local officer, decided that to stay would be foolhardy. Thomas Tye, a resident of Lyme, wrote a couple of days after the rebellion had been defeated. He wrote, "I am confident 40 men might have preserved this town, but our mayor, Captain Alford, immediately ran away. Neither had he provided any powder or encouraged any men." So with no desire to fight a losing battle, which would probably end with him being strung up to the nearest tree, he departed with embarrassing haste. In Macaulay's epic History of England he writes, "On the evening of which the Duke of Monmouth landed, Gregory Alford, Mayor of Lyme, a zealous Tory and a most bitter persecutor of nonconformists, sent off to give the alarm in Somersetshire and Dorsetshire, and himself took horse. He rode hard for Exeter to find the Duke of Albemarle, head of the Devon militia, to pass on the intelligence of the landing." This extract is taken from the House of Lords Journal. Gregory Alford's letter to James II, Honiton, the 11th of June 1685, near 12 at night. "May it please your sacred majesty, this evening between 7 and 8 of the clock, there came a great ship into the road of Lyme, not showing any colours, the off side of the ship not seen by us from the shore. She filled 5 great boats full of men, which they speeded behind the cob, and so landed. They went over the cliffs, and presently were in the town, at least 300 men, with the Duke of Monmouth at their head. So they became masters of the town. I presently, knowing that I should be first seized, took my horse, and came with all speed to this town, and gave notice to all the country as I came, and sent my servants that notice should be given to Somerset and Dorsetshire, and I hoped to be in Exeter in 2 hours, to give an account of it to the Duke of Albemarle. In the morning there landed at Chidiock, in our bay, 2 men, which I understanding sent by all ways to take them. Whether they be taken or not, I know not. So I humbly beseech your majesty to pardon this distracted relation, not doubting they have plundered me. I am your majesty's most humble servant, Gregory Alford, Mayor." Another individual who remained loyal to King James II was Lyme's deputy customs officer, Samuel Dassel. Before Dassel escaped, he did try to put up some resistance. The story goes that the town had some cannon facing the harbour and the anchored fleet, yet there was no gunpowder on hand. But Dassel had himself rowed out to an anchored merchantman in order to try and purchase some powder. But once on board, Monmouth and his entourage were well on their way into town. The merchantman might also have been a bit hesitant in assisting a firefight with a heavily armed frigate within cannon shot. Dassel now rode hard to London via Sherborne, and there with the MP for Lyme, one Sir Winston Churchill, and his son, one John Churchill, woke the king early in the morning. Now the name Churchill will be familiar. John Churchill, a man who had served the new king loyally since being a young page, was an up-and-coming courtier and soldier. He had been a comrade of Monmouth, and had even fought side by side in the siege of Maastricht. For our video on that escapade, click here. John Churchill would later become the Duke of Marlborough, the builder of Blenheim Palace, and an ancestor of the Second World War Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. The superb historical drama, The First Churchills, reenacts this critical moment.
Of the Romish religion, but hath called in multitudes of priests and Jesuits.
Is that the best you could get?
The only one, Master Dassel.
Then it must take both of us as far as Crewcairn. From there, you go to Taunton with a message for Colonel Luttrell.
And you?
I'm for London to see Sir Winston Churchill. Being our Parliament man, he'll know what to do.
Ah, Churchill. Well, here is my father, sir, the member for Lyme in Dorset.
Your Majesty.
I know you, sir. And this man? Mr. Dassel, customs officer at Lyme. He's ridden here without pause to tell my father that Monmouth has landed and commands the town. Tell me what you know.
Well, Your Majesty, I saw him land 4 days since in the afternoon. A few men, but well armed and none to oppose him.
The mail?
Oh, he ran off, sir.
Did he? By God.
Can't hardly blame him, can you? Well then, the Duke has a bit of a prayer-like on the beach, then marches up to the square and sets up a sort of banner. Fear nothing but God, it said. Then this here parson makes a long speech, saying all about Your Majesty being a usurper and a murdering King Charles.
What?
And how the Duke was rightfully King of England.
Will you swear he said that?
Oh, certainly, sir. I heard him myself. Well, then after that, seemingly all the men for miles around came in and joined up.
How many men?
Oh, thousands, they do say, sir.
Anything more?
No, sir, nothing. I sent young Thorold up to Taunton to alarm the militia and rode split arse up to London.
Thank you. You shall be rewarded. Sir Winston, I'm deeply obliged.
Ever at your service, sir. Jack.
We will cover the huge significance of this early morning audience with the king in our next episode. But back to the Westcountry. Despite the flood of recruits, Monmouth was receiving some disturbing news from his two messengers. Venner had returned from Taunton with recruits, but with the unwanted intelligence that the Somerset militia were in control of the town. Even more news came in soon after. The Dorset militia were in Bridport, about 10 miles away and in force, blocking his supposed axis of advance. Monmouth did not have the luxury of staying in Lyme training his fledgling army. He needed to move so A, he could tap new areas for recruits, and B, ensure he wasn't hemmed in by the geography of the Westcountry. He wanted to march through Bridport to get to the London road, and so he sent a substantial force to brush the Dorsetshire militia aside. His force would consist of foot, commanded by Wade, and his horse commanded by Venner and Lord Grey. As the rebel force approached the western outskirts, there was no opposition. The rebels rapidly passed over the bridge on the River Brit, leaving a small unit of pikemen as a rearguard. But as they advanced into the middle of town, they began to take musket fire from the Dorset militia, some on horseback as well, and even civilians firing from buildings. This unexpected assault from their flanks was a nuisance, and meant as the rebels advanced, they had to position men in the streets to halt any further attacks. Despite these attacks from militia, horse and civilians, the rebels pressed on. But the hold-up in the town had given the militia foot companies time to prepare a barricade on the bridge over the River Asker. Amidst the brisk and close-quarter firefight, Colonel Venner had been wounded. Grey, seeing his chance for glory, took his horse forward and charged headlong into the prepared defences. Disaster, of course, was close at hand. A thunderous volley from the militia's muskets crashed into Grey's cavalry and stopped them in their tracks. This volume of fire was more than enough, and the rebel horse about turned and bolted, back through their own infantry and out of town. The rebel companies afoot, their morale shattered by the fleeing cavalry, themselves were soon running back the way they had come. But the rout was slowed and then halted by Nathaniel Wade. He regrouped the panicked units and managed to carry out an organised and surprisingly professional fighting retreat. Regrouping at the far end of the town, they tried to entice the Dorset militia out of their strong positions, but it was to no avail. With time ticking, with riderless horses to collect and the wounded to care for, the rebels turned about and marched back to Lyme and to the Duke of Monmouth. So the Duke of Monmouth had finally landed and has begun his campaign against his uncle. But the rebellion, despite an initial rallying to his colours, has not begun brilliantly. In our next episode, we will see the Duke and his rebel army march north to Taunton, where finally he will be acclaimed king. Will this bring in more supporters? Will the country finally come round to him? We will have to wait and see. As always, thanks for watching.